Think about this for a second. What actually happens when a society's darkest truths are just buried, paved over with concrete and stitched into the silence of the dead? What happens when a system's most horrific secrets are completely wiped from the official record? Do those memories just vanish into thin air, or do they find some other way to survive? Well, as the saying goes, the body remembers what the archive destroys.
Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm going to be your enthusiastic history professor for this session, because we are diving into a really deep, really fascinating archival excavation. We're going to break down the incredible speculative fiction novel Ward 6B, Project Cleanse by Mpho Pule Kholopane. We'll explore exactly how this gripping story unearthed the hidden, deep-seated traumas of apartheid South Africa. It's a brilliant example of using fiction to hold up a mirror to real historical anxieties, specifically medical exploitation and the chilling everyday bureaucracy that makes state-sponsored erasure possible. All right, here's our syllabus for today's excavation. First, systems built on forgetting. Then, hospitals as state power. Next, we'll look at the bureaucracy of erasure, move into agents of forced disappearance, and wrap up with the body as archive.
Let's jump right into Chapter 1, Systems Built on Forgetting, the Architecture of Control.
You know, state-sponsored erasure doesn't just happen by accident. It actually relies on society being completely willing to ignore the invisible structures humming right beneath their feet. The author brilliantly grounds this horror in a super mundane, highly recognizable setting, the Chris Hani Baraganath Hospital in Soweto. Historically, this is a place of healing, right? A true monument to resilience. But the novel introduces this hidden sub-basement, a restricted Ward 6B, that has been entirely scrubbed from the official floor plans. This is the home of Project Cleanse, which is a covert operation designed to literally sterilize and dissect the future of Black South Africa. It just goes to show how everyday institutions can be weaponized to hide grotesque historical anxieties, all neatly sanitized by the language of science.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Hospitals as State Power, a Clash of Ethics.
We really have to ask ourselves, what happens when a place built for care is totally corrupted by systemic power? It creates this horrifying ethical clash. On one hand, you have the absolute expectation of medical care, maternity wards, bustling nurses, the preservation of human life. But then, on the other hand, you have the grim reality of Dr. Van Zyl's Ward 6B. It's a literal monument to erasure. We're talking illegal organ harvesting, refrigerated tables, boys with missing hearts rolled out on gurneys. It's brutal institutional violence. The novel sharply contrasts the sacred moral duty of a doctor against the nightmare of state-sponsored discrimination.
And the author makes you feel it too. The narrative anchors all this trauma in these highly visceral, sensory details. Just imagine the smell of bleach wrestling with the stench of decay in the damp air, the heavy, rusted steel doors that mark restricted access, the cold, unnatural blue-white lights of the operating theater, which, as we'll see later, is eventually pierced by this ancestral green-gold light of resistance. These sensory anchors evoke such a profound sense of trauma, which is such a jarring contrast to the sterile safety we usually associate with hospitals.
Chapter 3, The Bureaucracy of Erasure, Sanitizing Horror.
So, how does a massive system get away with all of this? Believe it or not, they use the most boring tool imaginable: paperwork. The state masks its bioethical violations behind barcodes, clipboards, and neatly typed forms. Let's treat this fictional transport manifest like a primary source for a second. It is chillingly clinical. Look at the columns: description, destination, authority. You've got cardiac tissue bound for Ruteplot, fetal remains marked for export, and maybe, most disturbingly, a discarded womb classified under TB. This reinforces one of the novel's fiercest critiques, that scientific and administrative systems are actively being used to catalog and smooth over state-sponsored atrocities. It makes the absolute horrific seem entirely routine.
And the crucial takeaway here is that it's not just about state control. It's about medical exploitation and corporate greed. This story introduces a shadowy corporate entity called Urgenitech. Human organs are literally graded as Grade A and barcoded for priority export to cities like Zurich and Amsterdam. We even see medical forms for young women casually stamped with infertile, discard. It's a brutal critique of how patients are entirely dehumanized, turning living human beings and their vital data into nothing more than inventory for a global pipeline.
Chapter 4, Agents of Forced Disappearance, The Trauma of the Street.
Let's shift our focus from those sterile underground labs up to the brutal reality of the township streets. I want to pose a question to you.
what does a white van symbolize? I mean, in a normal context, it means utility, maybe delivery, or an ambulance. But in the context of this specific historical anxiety, it is a visceral, terrifying symbol of state violence.
In the novel, the white van turns the mundane into a weapon. No number plates, no markings, just moving slowly, patiently hunting through the Dike frame. We experience this terror through Lebeau, an ambulance driver heavily burdened by his past. He is deeply haunted by the memory of a white van back in 1976. He remembers the back being slick with blood, and a child's single gray school shoe with red laces just floating in it. The van is the physical mechanism of forced disappearance. It sweeps people off the street without leaving a single trace behind.
14 years. That is the duration of Lebeau's silent complicity. For 14 years, he sat in his ambulance, watching those vans, keeping his head down, just surviving a system that actively demanded he look the other way. This really highlights the immense emotional weight of the archive of the missing. It's not just the trauma of the victims themselves, but the crushing burden carried by the witnesses who are forced into silence.
All right, our final chapter, the body as archive, resistance and memory.
If the state uses buildings and paperwork to erase people, how do the people fight back? They resist through the very bodies the state is trying to destroy. The narrative uses a truly fascinating concept here, called twinhood. In the story, the brothers Kagiso and Kosi share the synchronized brainwave frequency. This twinhood serves as a powerful metaphor for profound ancestral memory and resilience. At one point, Dr. Van Zyl tries to literally drill into Kagiso's skull to extract and digitize his tactical, ancestral inheritance for military use. But the twins' bond acts as a living, breathing archive. It's a frequency that the state's machinery simply cannot map or contain.
And we see this resistance manifest physically. As the drill gets closer, Kagiso begins an ancestral chant that completely spikes the medical monitors and disrupts the extraction. Suddenly, a green-gold light, which is the spirit of an ancestor named Nomteto, erupts right there in the surgical theater, proving that the harvest is incomplete. Meanwhile, out on the streets, the healer Mamaji sacrifices herself, but she leaves behind a sacred Nandoro shell. It's a physical piece of history that points the characters toward Robben Island. The body and the spirit are actively fighting back against the architecture of forgetting.
Let's map this out chronologically just to see how this fictionalized trauma spans across different eras. Lebeau's complicity kicks off during the 1976 uprisings. Flash forward to 1985, and the janitor Piet is loading organ transports at a military base. By 1990, we witness the horrific extraction attempt on Kagiso at Baragwanath. And then the timeline pushes forward toward this mysterious Bone Clock Station 6 on Robben Island. You can clearly see how the historical anxieties of apartheid morph, adapt, and industrialize across the decades.
Right before her warehouse is burned to the ground by AWB soldiers, the healer Mama G says, "You cannot burn what lives in the blood." Honestly, that perfectly summarizes our entire analysis today. Despite the absolutely horrifying institutional violence, the state ultimately fails because it cannot permanently destroy the endurance of ancestral memory. The archive of the state can be burned to ash, for sure, but the archive of the body, it endures.
We've unpacked how this novel uses a fictional medical conspiracy to reflect very, very real historical trauma. But it leaves us with a critical thought for our own time. As modern systems of data and medical history continue to evolve, what hidden societal traumas are we still burying under the guise of progress? When data becomes just inventory, how easily do we forget the human being behind the barcode? I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to look a little closer at the systems around us. Until next time, keep analyzing and keep questioning the archive.